On a summer morning in southern Italy, a Roman army marched toward the horizon and did not come back. That is the simplest way to say it. Traditionally dated to the 2nd of August, 216 BC, on a flat plain beside the river Aufidus in the region the Romans called Apulia, the largest army the Republic had ever put into the field walked into position and waited for the battle it believed would end the war. By dusk, it was gone. A standard-bearer lowered an eagle into the mud. 3 Numidian horsemen spurred their animals across a shallow ford, spray rising around their legs. A consul named Lucius Aemilius Paulus turned his head as if he had heard something moving behind him. He simply did not know yet what it was. This is the story of the most celebrated tactical defeat in the history of warfare. The man responsible was outnumbered. He planned it that way. His name was Hannibal Barca. He was a Carthaginian general, somewhere in his early 30s, already 2 years into a campaign that had killed 2 Roman armies before this one. He stood somewhere on that same Apulian plain, in a bronze cuirass and a dark blue cloak, watching the dust of perhaps 50,000 Romans and allied soldiers settle into their formations across the dry grass. He was not afraid of the number. He had designed the battle around it. Rome, by the summer of 216 BC, had almost run out of room to lose. 2 years earlier, Hannibal had crossed the Alps and brought a Carthaginian army into the Italian peninsula, an army Rome had never expected and could not quite believe. He had beaten 1 Roman force at the Trebia River and another at Lake Trasimene. 2 consular armies in 2 consecutive years had been shattered. The names of the dead filled the public records and the private grief of a city that was running low on both soldiers and faith. Hannibal's situation was different but no less urgent. He was deep inside enemy territory. He had no siege train, no easy line of supply, and no prospect of reinforcement from Carthage at a scale that would matter. What he needed was a victory so complete, so annihilating, that Rome's network of allied cities across Italy would calculate that the safer bet was now Carthage. Deprive Rome of that network, and you deprive it of the grain, the manpower, and the tribute that made it function. You do not need to burn the city. You simply make the city irrelevant. Both sides believed that morning that a single decisive engagement would settle the war. They were correct. Only one of them understood what settling it would actually require. Polybius, the Greek historian who is our best source for these events, claims the Roman force that day numbered something close to 86,000 men, including legions and allied troops, a figure some modern historians regard as too high, though estimates across the range still describe one of the largest armies the Republic ever deployed. Hannibal's force was perhaps 50,000. Fewer men, better cavalry, and a plan that turned the Roman advantage against itself. By dusk, by almost any ancient account, somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 Romans lay dead on that field. The exact number is disputed and probably beyond certainty. What is not disputed is what happened to the army, or why. How a smaller force destroyed a larger one in an afternoon, without accident and without luck, is what this story is about. But to understand it, you first need to understand how Hannibal came to be standing on that plain at all. To understand the field, you have to follow the man who chose it. The Second Punic War began in 218 BC, and it began over a city. Saguntum sat on the coast of Spain, nominally under Rome's protection. Hannibal Barca took it by siege. Behind that single act lay a longer quarrel. Carthaginian power was growing in Spain, and Rome did not intend to let it grow unchecked. So the 2 great powers of the Western Mediterranean went to war again. Rome expected to fight in Spain and Africa. Hannibal had other plans. He marched north, then east, then up into the Alps in autumn, dragging an army and its animals over passes no invading force was supposed to cross. The crossing was brutal. Men died in the snow, on the narrow tracks, under rockfalls and ambushes by mountain tribes. The ancient accounts give figures, but they disagree, and the true losses are not something we can pin down. What matters is the result. Hannibal came down into northern Italy with a smaller army than he had started with, and Rome was not ready for any army to appear there at all. The first blow came at the Trebia in 218 BC, on a cold river in the north. Hannibal did not simply meet the Romans. He drew them out. His horsemen provoked the Roman line, then fell back across the freezing water. The Romans followed, wet and cold and hungry, straight into the fight Hannibal wanted. His hidden troops struck the flank and rear. The Roman army broke. Here his signature was already visible. He let Roman aggression do half his work and turned their forward rush into their undoing. The next year, 217 BC, he did it again, only worse. At Lake Trasimene, he found a road that ran along the shore beneath wooded hills, with the water on one side and slopes on the other. He hid his men on those slopes in the morning fog. The consul Gaius Flaminius led his columns straight into the gap. When the trap closed, there was nowhere to go. Thousands were driven into the lake. Flaminius himself was killed in the press. Another Roman army, gone in a single morning. 2 consuls dead or defeated in 2 years. Rome now did something it reserved for emergencies. It appointed a dictator, Quintus Fabius Maximus, and handed him supreme command for a fixed term. Fabius had watched how the disasters happened, and he refused to give Hannibal a third. He shadowed the Carthaginian army across Italy, kept to high ground, cut off foragers, and denied the one thing Hannibal needed most, a pitched battle on open plains. He would not be lured. He would not be provoked. Slowly, patiently, he wore at an invader who had no easy way to resupply deep in enemy country. The strategy worked. It also stung. To many Romans, it looked like cowardice dressed up as caution. They gave Fabius a nickname, Cunctator, the delayer, and at first they meant it as an insult. An Italy full of burned farms watched a Roman army trail behind the man who had burned them and refused to strike. For a people who prized decisive victory, that was hard to swallow. That frustration became a force of its own. Rome did not want to be protected. Rome wanted to win, in the open, in one great clash that settled the matter. The mood in the city turned against delay, and the pressure fell on the men who would command next. So Rome resolved to raise an army so large that no cleverness could stand against it, and to send it after Hannibal to force the battle he had been chasing all along. Which leaves the question that decided everything before a single sword was drawn. Who, exactly, was going to command a force that size? Rome governed itself by fear of its own ambition. The Republic had watched what kings could do, and it had built its constitution as a cage for power. 2 consuls, elected every year, each holding identical authority, each able to veto the other. The system was elegant and deliberate. It was also, on the wrong field at the wrong moment, a structural trap. For 216 BC, the Senate reached further than usual. Rome raised a force that had no real precedent in the Republic's history, reportedly 8 legions at full or near full strength, plus the allied contingents that marched beside them. Ancient estimates put the combined total in the neighborhood of 80,000 fighting men, though modern historians work with a wider range and hold those numbers carefully. Whatever the true figure, it was approximately double the force Rome typically placed in the field under a single consular command. The message was unmistakable. Rome was not sending an army, it was sending a verdict. Both consuls went with it. Lucius Aemilius Paulus was the senior voice, a patrician in his 50s with a face carved by long service and the memory of a first consulship that had ended in censure. Gaius Terentius Varro stood opposite him in temperament, or so the tradition says. Dark-haired, impatient, a man of lower noble rank whom the aristocratic sources would later paint as a dangerous fool elevated above his station. The formal arrangement split command between them by the day. On any given morning, one consul held supreme authority. The next morning it passed to the other. Against a single enemy commander with a single plan running across multiple days, this was an invitation to confusion. The story that survived in most Latin and Greek sources is deceptively simple. Paulus wanted to wait. He read the terrain, trusted time, and urged caution. Varro wanted the battle now. On his day of command, he gave the order, and Rome suffered for it. That story should be handled with care. Our best source for Cannae is Polybius, a Greek historian writing in the 2nd century BC, who spent years in Rome as a political hostage and became closely attached to the household of the Aemilii and the Scipiones, the same family circle to which Paulus belonged. The portrait of Varro as a reckless demagogue who drove Rome to catastrophe is almost certainly colored by that association. Polybius was, in effect, a house historian for the winning side of the argument. Modern historians treat the reckless commoner caricature with real suspicion. Varro was not an outsider promoted by accident. He was an elected consul of the Roman Republic, chosen by popular vote in a city that had survived 2 centuries of hard military judgment. He understood the stakes, and when the battle was lost, and Rome might reasonably have blamed him into exile, or worse, the Senate instead thanked him formally for not despairing of the Republic. That is not how Rome treated a fool. The honest account is harder and more instructive than the traditional. The plain beside the Aephitus River stretches flat and open in every direction. Dry grass fades toward a slow green river on one side and low hills on the other. There is nowhere to hide. There is nowhere to retreat unseen. Whatever happens here will happen in full view, and it will happen fast. That openness mattered. Flat, unobstructed ground gives the advantage to the side with better cavalry. Cavalry needs room to build speed, room to swing wide, room to hit a rear at an angle. The Romans knew this, and yet they marched onto this plain anyway. Hannibal had the better horsemen. In choosing this terrain, the Romans had handed their enemy the one advantage he most needed. Now the armies faced each other, and how many men stood on either side is a question historians have argued ever since. Polybius, the closest and most rigorous of our ancient sources, puts the Roman force at roughly 86,000 soldiers, legions and allied contingents combined. Livy's account differs in its details. Modern historians have pushed that number considerably lower, with serious estimates running from around 50,000 up to the Polybian figure. These are ancient claims and modern ranges, not certainties. Hannibal's army was smaller. Polybius gives him roughly 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry, something near 50,000 in total. The Romans almost certainly outnumbered him. By how much is debated, but in that imbalance lay the Roman plan. The legionaries at Cannae were arranged more densely than usual. The manipular system normally traded some mass for flexibility, spacing units so they could maneuver and respond. Here the consuls packed the maniples deeper, one rank tight behind another. The idea was simple and brutal. Drive straight through Hannibal's center with sheer concentrated weight. This was not finesse. This was a hammer. The Roman soldiers were disciplined, well-armored, veterans of hard campaigns. In close quarters, pressed together, charging forward, they were as formidable an infantry force as the ancient world had produced. On foot, on flat ground, they were very difficult to stop. Hannibal had not assembled a single kind of army. He had collected different fighting styles under one coherent mind. In the center of his line stood his Iberian and Celtic infantry, Gauls mostly, fierce in short, violent bursts, less reliable under a sustained, grinding press. On the flanks, held back and waiting, stood his Libyan veterans. These men had been with Hannibal since Spain, since the crossing of the Alps. After Trebia and Trasimene, they had stripped Roman dead from the battlefield and re-equipped themselves in captured Roman armor. They looked, from a distance, almost like legionaries themselves. For cavalry, Hannibal had 2 distinct forces: his Numidian light horse, North Africans on small, swift mounts, no saddles, no stirrups, carrying javelins, nearly impossible to pin and ferocious at harassing a flank. On the other wing, his heavy Iberian and Celtic cavalry, hard riders who could drive through an opposing line and keep going. The Romans had cavalry too, but against Hannibal's riders they were outnumbered, and ancient sources agree the gap was real. This was the hinge. Not the infantry, not the swords, not the courage of individual men. The cavalry was the hinge, and everything that followed would turn on it. The Romans had built their entire plan around their heavy center, around weight and discipline and forward momentum. They expected the battle to be decided on foot, in the middle. Hannibal had read that expectation as clearly as if it had been written down and handed to him, and he had constructed his formation around it, piece by piece, waiting for exactly the assault the Romans were now preparing to deliver. Look at the line Hannibal draws across the plain, and you are looking at a decision, not an accident. He puts his weakest men in the most dangerous place on purpose. The Gauls and the Iberians, brave but less reliable than his veterans, fill the center. He does not hold them back. He pushes them forward, out ahead of the rest of the line, until the whole formation swells into a shallow crescent that bulges toward the Romans. To a Roman officer looking across the field, this reads as arrogance. The enemy's center is thin and exposed, begging to be broken. That is exactly what Hannibal wants them to see. Behind that bulge, angled back on either side, wait the men who matter most. These are the African veterans, the Libyan spearmen who have marched with him since Spain, re-equipped now in armor stripped from Roman dead. They do not advance. They stand quiet on the flanks, turned slightly inward, holding their ground while the center goes out to meet the storm. The cavalry splits by type. His heavy Iberian and Celtic horsemen mass in a single dense block on one wing. The lighter Numidians spread across the other, quick and loose, riders on small horses who fight by wheeling in and away. Now hold all of that in your mind at once, because the pieces only make sense together. The plan works like a trap that springs itself. The Romans will pour their weight into the center, into the bulge, and the bulge will give, slowly, on purpose. The Gauls and Iberians are meant to fall back step by step, bending the crescent the wrong way until it caves inward and becomes a pocket. The deeper the Romans push, the tighter they crowd into that pocket, chasing a breakthrough that was never real. While the center bends, the heavy cavalry does the decisive work. It hits the Roman horse on the wing, breaks it, and then does the thing Roman cavalry would rarely think to do. Instead of chasing the beaten riders off the field, it wheels around behind the whole Roman mass and rides for the rear. And the African veterans on the flanks, the ones who have been standing and waiting, turn inward against the Roman sides. Center bending, flanks closing, cavalry sealing the back. That is the machine. Every part depends on every other part firing in sequence. The nerve this required is hard to overstate. The entire design rests on the weakest troops in the army holding together under the heaviest infantry Rome could field, and giving ground without breaking. There is a difference between a controlled retreat and a rout, and in the noise and crush of contact, that difference can vanish in a heartbeat. If the center snaps instead of bends, there is no pocket. There is only a hole, and a Roman army pouring through it. So Hannibal does not watch from a hill. He places himself and his brother Mago right behind that fragile center, in the most likely place to die. They are there to steady the Gauls with their presence, to hold the line by standing in it. The commander stakes his own life on the part of the plan most likely to fail. Step back, and the whole thing inverts. What looks like Carthaginian weakness is the bait. What looks like Roman strength, that deep and disciplined mass driving through the middle, is being aimed straight into a bag that is about to close. The Romans think the center is the way through. It is the way in. Everything now waits on contact. Two lines stand a short walk apart on the open plain, one certain it is about to win, the other counting on that certainty. Then the front ranks lower their weapons. The ground closes between them, and the killing begins. The two lines meet on the plain, and the noise of it carries across the river. The Roman center drives straight into the bulge. Legionaries push forward, shields braced, swords working in the press. The Gauls and Iberians in front of them give ground. To the men in the Roman ranks, this feels like the thing they came for. The enemy is bending. The enemy is breaking. They lean into the gap and push harder. They are not winning. They are walking deeper into the design. On the wings, the fighting is already decided. Hannibal's heavy cavalry hits the Roman horse and breaks it fast. The Roman riders scatter or fall. And here, the Carthaginian cavalry does the thing that separates this day from every other. It does not chase the beaten enemy off the field. It reins in. It wheels. It turns back toward the Roman rear. In the center, the crescent keeps folding. The Gauls and Iberians retreat in a slow, controlled bend, trading ground without shattering. What was a bulge toward the Romans becomes a hollow that swallows them. The legionaries pour into it, chasing the retreat, and as they press forward, the sides of the pocket close around their flanks. Men who were in an open line find themselves in a shrinking space. Then the African veterans move. On both flanks, they turn inward, angled back until now, waiting, fresh, ordered, wearing captured Roman armor. They grind into the exposed Roman sides. The Romans, who thought they were the hammer, feel the walls come in. The cavalry closes the last gap at the back. The pocket becomes a ring. And now the deepest formation Rome ever fielded becomes the reason so many die. The maniples were massed thick to punch through by sheer weight. Packed together and pressed from every side, that mass has nowhere to go. Men in the middle cannot see the enemy. They cannot lift a shield. They cannot swing a sword. Some cannot raise their arms at all. The strength that was meant to break Hannibal's line has folded in on itself. What follows is not really a battle anymore. It is a killing, and it is slow. The Carthaginians work the outer edge of the ring at their own pace. They cut down the men at the rim, and the ring tightens, and the next rank becomes the rim. Inside, thousands stand jammed shoulder to shoulder, unable to fight, unable to flee, listening to the sound coming closer. Picture the faces at the center. They understand what has happened before it reaches them. Lucius Aemilius Paulus dies here, somewhere in the press, the consul who by the surviving tradition had wanted to wait. The accounts differ on the exact manner of his end, but they agree he did not leave the field. Around him fall the men who came to Cannae to lead, senators serving in the ranks, tribunes and officers, much of a generation of Roman command, gone in a single afternoon on one stretch of open ground. Gaius Terentius Varro, the other consul, cuts free with a small band of horsemen and rides clear. He lives, and that fact will matter later, though it is hard to imagine what he carries with him as he goes. By the time the light begins to fade, the ring has done its work. The sounds thin out. The plain body offitus grows quiet in a way that a battlefield almost never does. Weapons lie where they were dropped. The field is still. And into that stillness comes the oldest question after any slaughter. How many? When morning came, someone had to walk the ground and try to count. The field has grown still. What the ancient world left behind was not a record, but a reckoning, and it has never fully settled. The numbers begin with Polybius, the Greek historian who remains our best source on the Second Punic War. Polybius places Roman dead at roughly 70,000. He was methodical. He was also connected to the family of the Roman consul Aemilius Paulus, and he wrote in part to explain how Rome could be beaten so badly and still survive. That context does not make him unreliable, but it shapes what he chose to count and how. Livy, writing more than a century and a half after the battle, offers a different breakdown. He records roughly 47,500 infantry killed and 2,700 cavalry dead, with around 10,000 more taken prisoner. Livy drew on earlier sources that no longer exist. His account tends toward the dramatic. The numbers, again, are a claim, not a census. Modern historians place most of their estimates somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 Roman dead, and they acknowledge that range may still be wide of the truth. Ancient armies could not stop to count themselves in a rout. The figures passed through multiple hands before they reached any writer we can read. Scholars note that large numbers served ancient authors well. They made the disaster legible, the survival miraculous, and the storytelling powerful. Even so, the lower bound alone gives pause. 50,000 dead in an afternoon places Cannae among the worst single days of battle in all of recorded history. Historians who draw comparisons to the greatest single-day losses in much later wars do so as a way of conveying scale, not as a precise equivalence. The numbers sit in the same range. That context is enough to place the day in singular company. Carthaginian losses run to roughly 5,700 to 8,000, according to the ancient sources. Within that count, the heaviest toll fell on the Gauls who had held the center. The African veterans on the flanks came through the day in far better condition. That distribution matters. The men who died defending the collapsing center were not Hannibal's finest soldiers. They were the warriors he needed to absorb pressure and give ground slowly without breaking. The fact that they suffered most confirms the reading that the center was a deliberate sacrifice. Hannibal did not spend his best troops. He spent the ones the plan required. What the full figures reveal is a ratio without easy parallel in the ancient world. A smaller Carthaginian force came close to annihilating a larger Roman one. Polybius understood the weight of this. He called it a defeat without precedent in Roman memory. Modern military thinkers return to that same arithmetic when they need a reference point for what a battle of annihilation actually requires. That is why the name Cannae carries specific weight, separate from the legend. Not because of the dust and the river and the summer heat, but because of what the numbers say about what a superior plan can do to a superior number. Rome had known catastrophe before. The Trebia and Lake Trasimene had each cost an army. But those losses, however severe, did not strip away the Republic's institutional memory. Cannae did. The senators who fell in that press, the officers and their subordinates, the men who knew how to run Rome at war. The question that follows the counting is the one this story must now answer. What does a state do when it has absorbed a blow that by all precedent should have ended it, and chooses, against that precedent, to keep fighting? The field was still warm when Hannibal came to Hannibal. The Numidian commander had just broken the Roman rear. Now, the sources say, he pressed his general for one more march. Take the cavalry, ride hard, and in a few days you will dine on the capital in Rome. Hannibal hesitated. He praised the idea and declined it. That refusal produced the most famous line in the whole story. Livy gives it to Hannibal. You know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but you do not know how to use one. It is a sharp line, and it has echoed for 2,000 years. Treat it with care. Livy wrote more than a century and a half after the battle, and this exchange has the polish of later invention. It may be a real memory. It may be a Roman writer building a lesson into a scene. The record is not a transcript. So why did Hannibal not march? Two readings survive, and both hold weight. The first is the lost chance. Rome was reeling, its army gone, its leadership shattered. A bold stroke might have finished it. The second reading is colder and more practical. Hannibal had no siege train. He did not have the numbers to storm a large walled city defended by a population that would fight for its home. His whole strategy was never to take Rome by assault. It was to break the alliance system that made Rome strong. Beat the Romans badly enough, often enough, and their Italian allies would peel away. That was the war he was fighting, and for a while, it worked. After Cannae, Capua, one of the largest cities in Italy, opened its gates to him. Much of the south went over. Syracuse in Sicily later shifted toward Carthage. Philip V of Macedon, watching from across the Adriatic, allied himself with Hannibal. This was the real damage Cannae did, not the bodies on the field, the cracks running through Rome's network of friends. Then Rome did the thing no one expected. It refused to break. Hannibal sent envoys with an offer to ransom the thousands of prisoners he held. The Senate said no. It would not pay. It would not negotiate. It would not treat with him at all. When Varro, the surviving consul, returned to the city that had every reason to blame him, the Senate went out to meet him and thanked him. They thanked him for not despairing of the Republic. Read that again. The man whose command day ended in the worst defeat in Roman history was thanked because he had not given up on Rome, and Rome did not give up on itself. It enrolled new legions from a bled generation. It armed men too young and too old. It bought slaves and promised them freedom if they fought, the Volones, and put weapons in their hands. Then it went back to the strategy it had once mocked. No more open battles against Hannibal. Shadow him, starve him, wear him down. The patient way of Fabius the Delayer. Here is the deeper reason Rome could absorb a catastrophe that would have ended almost any other state. Its manpower base was enormous, and its core allies in central Italy stayed loyal. Hannibal could win battle after battle and still not reach the bottom of Rome's reserves. He was one army, deep in hostile country, unable to be everywhere. Rome could lose 50,000 men and raise 50,000 more. That resilience, and not any single afternoon on the plain of Cannae, is what decided the Second Punic War, which leaves us with the strangest fact of all. The most perfect victory in the ancient world belonged to the side that was already losing the war. 2,000 years after the Aufidus ran red, military academies were still studying what happened on that Apulian plain. The name Cannae entered a new life. It stopped being only a place and became a concept, a shorthand. The word soldiers and strategists reached for when they meant something precise, a numerically inferior force drawing a larger one into an embrace and closing it from all sides. The German Field Marshal Alfred von Schlieffen was its most famous student. In the years around the turn of the 20th century, he returned to Cannae obsessively, reading the ancient accounts, mapping the movements, sketching the geometry of annihilation. He titled his study simply Cannae. The ideas he developed there shaped Germany's opening war plan in 1914, the Great Wheel through Belgium that history would call the Schlieffen Plan. Whether that plan was a faithful reading of the battle is a debate historians still carry. What is documented is that one afternoon's fighting in 216 BC was still being argued in German staff colleges more than 2,000 years later. The Gulf War of 1991 added another chapter. American commanders planning the ground campaign spoke of Cannae openly. invoking the double envelopment as a model. The left hook through the Iraqi desert was not a replica of Hannibal's formation, but the idea behind it was familiar. Encircle, deny, escape. This is in the planning record, not legend. That reach across 2 millennia is itself a kind of answer to a question Cannae raises. Why does this battle last? Not because Carthage won the war. It did not. Hannibal won the day at Cannae. Carthage lost the war. The battle is studied precisely because of that gap, because it demonstrates what tactics alone can and cannot do. Hannibal spent more than a decade in Italy after Cannae. He never got a better morning. He moved through the south, harried and brilliant, holding territory without the reinforcements Carthage never sent. Rome rebuilt. Attrition shifted the balance. The war moved to Africa, and Hannibal was recalled to defend the city he had spent his life threatening Rome to save. At Zama in 202 BC, he met Scipio, the Roman general history would call Africanus. Scipio had fought at Cannae as a young man, one of the survivors who walked off that field and refused to treat the battle as the end. He had spent years learning from Hannibal, borrowing the general's own methods. At Zama, the cavalry turned as it had turned before, this time against Hannibal's line. The pocket closed from a different direction. Hannibal lost. He lived long afterward, moving between courts and exile, advising enemies of Rome, hunted by Roman pressure until, somewhere in Bithynia, he chose to take poison rather than be handed over. The exact date is uncertain, and the sources are thin. What Cannae gives us, finally, is not a simple lesson about genius. It gives us a harder one. A battle can be perfect and still fail to decide anything beyond itself. Hannibal understood encirclement better than anyone alive in his century. He made it work against the largest army Rome had ever put in the field, and it was not enough, because the war was not only fought on that plain by the Aufidus, it was fought in the loyalty of allies, in the depth of Rome's manpower, in the decisions of a Senate that refused to call defeat a defeat. Strategy, time, and resilience had the last word. Tactics never do. The question Cannae leaves open is the one that follows every great victory, not how the battle was won, but what it was actually worth. That question has an answer, and it lives in Africa, at a place called Zama.